Welcome to the Housing Authority's Section 8 Housing Voucher Program briefing video. The Section 8 Voucher Program is a federal housing program authorized by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. The Section 8 Voucher Program allows you, as a participant, to find a housing unit in the private market and receive a subsidy on that unit from the Housing Authority to make it affordable. The voucher program is a partnership between you as a tenant, the landlord, the Housing Authority, and the federal government. All parts of the partnership must meet their obligations in order for the housing assistance to work. As you can imagine, there is some very important information that I would like to share with you so that you can be well informed on how the Section 8 program works. The tools that you will need to become a successful participant are located here in your briefing packet that will be provided to you by the Housing Authority during your initial briefing. In addition, you should have a piece of paper and pen available so that you can write down any questions you may have. It is important for you to understand the information that we will be covering today. First, let's cover some terms that I will be using during this video. PHA, Public Housing Authority, is the entity that administers the Section 8 program. In exchange for the money that HUD gives them for the voucher program, they too must follow many federal regulations. Many of these rules will be covered with you today. HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, is a cabinet department within the United States federal government. HUD allows funding and creates policies for the PHA. Board of Commissioners. Each PHA is required to have a board of commissioners that is appointed by a governing body. In most cases, the county commissioners appoint the Housing Authority Board. The executive director and PHA staff report to the Board of Commissioners. The North Dakota Century Code establishes the Public Housing Authority and Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners are appointed and volunteer to serve on the Housing Authority Board. TTP, Total Tenant Payment or Tenant Payment, is the amount of money that you will be responsible for toward the cost of your rent and utilities. In order for the PHA to make the determination of what you will be paying for rent, many things are considered, such as your income, your family size, cost of daycare, and medical expenses. When rent is calculated, 30% of your adjusted income will go towards the payment of your rent and utilities. It may be necessary for you to use a minimum rent that has been established by your housing authority according to bedroom size. Your housing authority will discuss this in great detail with you. HAP, Housing Assistance Payment, payment made by the Housing Authority directly to the landlord on behalf of the tenant. Affordable housing is that which the tenant is paying no more than 30% of their household income toward the total household costs, including utilities. Rent burdened. HUD considers a household rent burdened if 40% or more of the adjusted income will go towards housing costs. HUD prohibits the PHA from assisting households in a unit where 40% or more of the adjusted income will go toward housing costs. To receive assistance, the household may need to choose a different unit. Admin Plan or Administrative Plan is the Housing Authority's policies and procedural manual for the Section 8 program. The document allows HUD guidance and is available to the public. Payment Standard. The maximum subsidy a PHA can pay on behalf of a family. The PHA establishes the payment standard based on HUD guidelines. This is the target rent amount that you should try to stay as close to when looking for a new home. The payment standard that you qualify for is based on your family size and will be given to you when you meet with the Housing Authority Section 8 person. Utility allowance. The amount that a PHA determines is necessary to cover the resident's reasonable utility costs. The utility allowance may be used to cover expenses such as space heating, water heating, cooling, refrigeration, lighting, or appliances. This is an added allowance that the Housing Authority gives to you if the rent that your landlord is charging does not include all utilities paid. This, along with your payment standard, will be covered in detail with your Housing Authority representative. Inspections. After you have chosen and had your application accepted to rent a unit, it will be necessary for a representative of the Housing Authority to make a physical inspection of the housing unit to make sure that it is a safe place for you to live. Some of the things they will be looking at are operable smoke detectors, windows and doors that lock, electrical and plumbing issues, and the condition of the painted surfaces. Your new home must pass inspection before you receive assistance. In addition, an inspection is necessary at each annual recertification date as well. There are two types of inspections, HQS or Housing Quality Standards, and UPSC or Uniform Physical Condition Standards. Annual recertification. Each year at the anniversary date of your assistance, you will be required to recertify your income and family composition. You will receive a letter from the Housing Authority informing you of your upcoming certification. It is important to keep these appointments in order to maintain your assistance. Interim recertification. If your income or family composition should change prior to your annual recertification date, it may be necessary to inform the Housing Authority of interim changes that have taken place in your household. If you are not sure whether or not to let the Housing Authority know of any changes that may have taken place, it would be a good idea to let them know and allow them to make the proper determination. It is always better to keep the Housing Authority informed. Term of assistance. The length of time a person qualifies for assistance. A household is eligible to stay on the program as long as they receive housing assistance of a minimum of $1 from the Housing Authority. If you become self-sufficient to where you no longer need help from the Housing Authority in paying your rent, there is a 6-month grace period. This grace period designates 6 months where you pay the full amount of rent due to your landlord and the Housing Authority pays 0. If after the 6 months are up and you no longer need housing assistance, you are then taken off of the assistance rolls. If, however, for any reason within those 6 months your income changes and you qualify again for housing assistance, you will be given the assistance at that time. It is important to understand, however, to keep this provision in place, you cannot move during the 6-month grace period. There is no time limit on how long you can receive housing assistance. Lease. The legal contract signed between you and the landlord. The lease should include all household members, the address, start date, end date or term, deposit amount, rent amount, and utilities and other details. Make sure to read the lease and understand your obligations as a tenant in that unit. Tenancy addendum. Additional terms stating the expectations and rules between the PHA, landlord, and tenant as part of the housing assistance contract. Cutoff date. Some housing authorities have a cutoff date to report any changes for the next month. Ask if your housing authority has a cutoff date and always report your income in a timely fashion. Now that we have covered some terms that will pop up in this video, let's review your informational packet. Fair housing. There is a fair housing brochure in your packet. If the tenant or any member of the family has reason to believe that while in search for suitable housing, it has been discriminated against on the basis of age, race, color, religion, sex, disability, national origin, or familial status, the tenant may file a housing discrimination complaint. If this is the case, or if you have any questions regarding fair housing, this brochure gives you the information of the people to contact. In North Dakota, landlords cannot deny you a rental based on that you are a voucher holder. Landlords may have other screening requirements, and it is best that you ask about screening measures before applying for a unit. Voucher. This is a very important document. This form gives you the ability to go out into the private market, rent a housing unit, and receive housing assistance within your voucher size and correct payment standard. The voucher has a 60-day time frame. In order to receive housing assistance, you must find a suitable unit and get the appropriate paperwork completed within that 60 days. If you are getting close to the 60-day limit and still cannot find a unit, contact the Housing Authority immediately. There may be an extension that they can grant you on a case-by-case basis. One of the most important parts of this form is located on the back side of the page under the heading of Obligations of the Family. The family must follow these rules in order to continue participating in the Houser Voucher program. Let's go through those now. Go through the family obligations on the voucher. Provide all information that the Housing Authority or HUD requests. Abide by criminal activity and history policies. Allow the Housing Authority to inspect the unit annually. Promptly inform the Housing Authority of any income or household changes. Inform the Housing Authority of any absence from the unit. Notify the Housing Authority of any visitors. Pay all utilities and tenant rent portions on time. And more. Please read through your tenant packet. Ask any questions to the Housing Authority staff person who is meeting with you. Request for tenancy approval. Once you have found the housing unit that you wish to rent, you must have this request for tenancy form completed. This packet needs to be completed between the tenant and the landlord. It may be helpful to complete it together. Some of the information that is found on the form includes address, when you plan on moving in, number of bedrooms, amount of rent to be charged, security deposit required, and who is going to pay for the utilities. Once you have this form completed, bring it to the Housing Authority immediately, along with an unsigned lease. This is the form that authorizes the Housing Authority to conduct the inspection. A good place to live. This is a brief description of the items that your housing inspector will be looking for when they conduct an inspection on the place you choose to rent. It's a good idea to make yourself familiar with these items, as the housing authority will not allow you to lease a housing unit with assistance that does not pass these guidelines. Some housing authorities use new inspection guidelines and should explain the difference. Authorization for the Release of Information and Privacy Act notice. You are required to sign this form. By signing this consent form, you are authorizing HUD and the housing authority to request income and other verifications from the sources listed. HUD and the housing authority need this information to verify your household's income in order to ensure that you are eligible for the assisted housing benefits and that these benefits are set at the correct level. HUD and the housing authority participate in a computer matching program where the sources of your income identified by the IRS, Social Security Administration, and state, local, and local businesses are matched with the information that you provide to the housing authority. Each member of your household over the age of 18 must sign these forms, regardless of whether or not they are still in school. Adding household members. The Section 8 policy states that no adult person other than those listed on the lease shall live or stay in the unit without the housing authority's prior approval and the landlord's approval. All income and assets of any new members will count for housing assistance. Should you wish to add new household members, a new application for addition to household will need to be completed. Know your responsibilities as a participant in the Section 8 Housing Assistance Program. For the most part, many of your responsibilities are covered on the voucher form. We use this form to ensure that you fully recognize the importance of knowing and following the rules for the voucher program. You will be signing these forms, so you cannot use the excuse that you were not aware of the rules should a problem occur. Notice of portability. After you have satisfied certain provisions of the program, you can take your assistance with you anywhere in the United States. It's called utilizing portability. If you think that you may be interested in porting your assistance to another housing authority, please let your housing authority know, and they will help you find a housing authority in the jurisdiction where you want to move. It is important to know, however, that you must be in good standing with the current housing authority. Protect your family from lead in your home. If you rent a home that was built prior to 1978, you must be informed that it could contain lead-based paint. HUD is taking the business of lead-based paint very serious because it can pose serious health hazards to humans and in particular children. With this in mind, we advise all households about the dangers of lead-based paint, dust, and soil if it is not managed properly. Please read this brochure located in your packet carefully. With the request for tenancy packet, there is a form in which you will sign to indicate that you have been informed about the dangers of lead-based paint and that you have been supplied with the appropriate brochure. Informal hearing. An informal hearing may be requested if the housing authority takes an action against you that you do not agree with. After receiving a request for a hearing in writing, the housing authority may schedule a meeting in front of a neutral party where an explanation can be given for the housing authority's action, and you will have the opportunity to explain yourself. Even though this is an informal process, you may have an attorney present with you if you wish. Criminal activity and history policies. Each housing authority has policies regarding criminal activity and history. Housing authorities can make decisions based on arrest, charges, or convictions depending on the severity. Be sure you are aware of the housing authority's criminal history policy for which you are located. Translators. If your household does not speak English well and speaks another language fluently, you can request a verbal translator through the housing authority at no cost to the household. The same applies if your household requires a sign language interpreter. Reasonable accommodations. If your household includes someone with a disability, make sure to inform the housing authority of any reasonable accommodations required to properly assist the household. Understanding the lease is a core responsibility of the tenant, as it is a legal agreement. Some points to note. Understand the rental parties. The landlord is the owner or manager of the property. The tenant is the person renting the property. Make sure your name is clearly and correctly reported on the lease. The lease should clearly define the monthly rent amount as well as when rent payments are due. It is important to understand the penalties for late payments, as they may range from a small penalty fee to a possible eviction. This should be identified on your lease. In case a problem or dispute arises between you and your landlord, the court is going to uphold what is written on the lease. Do not enter into any side agreements that are not in writing. Look for any statements about the landlord's right to raise the rent and recognize the timeline that may be in place for them to do so. Understand who is responsible for the utilities for the property and identify where it is noted on the lease, as well as what businesses to call to get them turned on. The security deposit for most leases is equal to the first month's rent. This amount is determined by the landlord. The lease needs to contain provisions that address when a landlord is allowed to keep a deposit. The Housing Authority can determine assistance to participants due to an eviction from a lease violation. There are 10 items we need to review to help you become a successful participant on the Section 8 voucher program. Meet with the Housing Authority to obtain all of the necessary forms. Go out into the private market and find a suitable rental unit. Some housing authorities even include a listing of landlords in your briefing packet. Remember, some of the things you should consider when looking for a place to live are the condition of the unit, whether the rent is reasonable and within the payment standard, the cost of any tenant-paid utilities, the location of the unit, including the proximity to public transportation, centers of employment, schools, and shopping, if the landlord is willing to participate in the Section 8 program. Complete the form Request for Tenancy Approval once you have identified the unit you would like to rent. Bring the Request for Tenancy Approval form along with an unsigned lease to the Housing Authority office. The Housing Authority will set up a time for the housing inspection. If the housing unit does not pass the initial inspection, the Housing Authority will inform the landlord of what repairs must be made prior to entering into housing assistance contract. Your landlord may make the repairs immediately, at which point in time the unit can be approved. Or they may decide that they do not want to make the repairs, at which point in time you must resume your search for a suitable housing unit. If the housing unit passes inspection, your Housing Authority representative will give you the approval to enter into a lease. In most cases, an initial 12-month lease is required for all new move-ins. The Housing Authority will inform you what you will pay for rent. Remember, your portion of the rent is paid to the landlord, not to the Housing Authority. Each month, the Housing Authority will send their portion of the rent to the landlord, and so between your payment and the Housing Authority's payment, your rent will be paid in full for the month. If your income or family composition should change, contact your Housing Authority and let them know any changes that may have taken place. And lastly, 60 to 90 days prior to the anniversary date of your assistance, the Housing Authority will be contacting you to remind you of the need to recertify your income and family composition. Be sure to answer this request for information promptly. Always check your local housing authority's policies. If you have questions, be sure to ask them how to prevent any adverse actions. This concludes our briefing video. Remember, to become a successful participant in the Section 8 voucher program, communication is extremely important. If you have any type of question, feel free to contact your housing authority representative. And good luck on your housing search.